Man, you ever have one of those moments where somebody says something so unexpected, so out of left field, that it just kind of freezes you for a second? Like you're sitting there, thinking you know exactly what this person's about, what they've been inspired by their whole life, and then boom, they drop a line that hits deeper than you expect. That's exactly what happened when I heard that remark, man. This idea that the storytelling tradition in Islam and the Muslim world actually rivals the mythic depth of ancient heroic tales. And look, when you hear that coming from a guy who literally built modern mythology, you don't just shrug that off, you listen, you pay attention. Because when a dude who shaped superheroes for generations says something as mythically powerful, he's not talking casually, he's speaking from decades of living inside stories. And it got me thinking, you know how we all grew up with Greek mythology, Roman legends, Norse gods, all that crazy stuff? Zeus throwing lightning, Hercules wrestling monsters, Odin and Thor doing their thunder god thing. That's the big, loud mythological world that people usually compare everything to. But what he was talking about wasn't loud, it was layered. He was pointing to something, quieter but deeper, something that doesn't just entertain you but anchors you. And the more you sit with that idea, the more you realize, damn, he wasn't just being poetic, there's actually something there. Because if you really look at Islamic storytelling, not just the stories in the Quran, but the way stories have been treated, preserved, told, expanded, passed from one generation to another, it's wild. It's like a whole living ecosystem of narratives, morals, symbols, metaphors. It's not just one hero doing superhuman stuff, it's generations of people navigating real human struggles, spiritual awakenings, quests for truth, moral courage, patience, loyalty, betrayal, redemption, all the stuff you'd expect in the biggest Hollywood universes, except rooted in actual history, actual people, actual experiences. And there's this unbelievable sense of scale. These aren't stories that sit on a bookshelf and gather dust. They're stories people live by. They're stories that shape how entire civilizations think, how families raise their kids, how communities form. And when he said that, I remember thinking, wait a second, he's right. Think about the prophets. Every single one of them feels like this massive figure with arcs that would put any blockbuster trilogy to shame. The storms, the migrations, the moral crossroads, the trials, and then the companions. These are people who went from ordinary lives to becoming legendary figures who literally changed the course of history. There's a reason people still talk about them like they're alive. Their stories hit you right in the chest because they're so raw and so human. It's like the stakes were never about superpowers. They were about character, about conviction, about the kind of courage you don't get from gamma radiation or Asgardian ancestry, but from something way heavier. And the way those stories are told, man, it's different. They're not written like entertainment. They're structured like these multi-layered reflections that keep revealing new things as you get older, as you face your own problems. You hear a story at 10, it inspires you. You hear it again at 30, it teaches you discipline. You hear it again at 50, it gives you perspective. It's like it grows with you, and that's the difference between myth and something with spiritual gravity. A myth stays the same. These stories evolve as you evolve. And that's where his remark really hits. You realize that mythic depth doesn't just mean big characters or dramatic moments. It means stories with meaning that survives time. Stories with moral architecture. Stories that carry you when your own life feels chaotic. Ancient mythology never really cared if you became a better person. It was wild entertainment. But Islamic storytelling, its whole purpose is transformation. Not just of one person, but of generations. And that's heavy. That's like storytelling on a cosmic level. You know what's crazy, man? The more you look into it, the more you realize that the storytelling in the Islamic world wasn't just happening in books or scriptures. It was happening in the streets, in the tea houses, in the markets, in these old gathering spots where people would sit together at night. Like imagine a whole culture where storytelling isn't this hobby. It's a way of preserving identity, passing down wisdom, teaching kids who they are, reminding adults what they stand for. That's powerful. That's like the earliest form of a podcast, but instead of mics and cameras, you've got lanterns and a dude with a voice that could silence an entire room. And that's what he was pointing to. He was basically saying, hey, the mythic stuff we think is so epic, the stuff in our comic books and movies, humans have been living that energy for centuries. and Muslims were doing it at a level people still don't fully understand. And he's right. Because look at the classic Islamic narratives. They don't rely on spectacle, they rely on inner battles. They're more psychological than physical. They deal with pride, temptation, loyalty, fear, mercy, justice. Those are the biggest villains and biggest allies anyone can ever face, and they're inside you, not outside. That's a whole different kind of heroism. Take the story of Prophet Ibrahim, man. You want to talk about mythic? This is a guy who stood against his own people, his own father, the entire system, because he believed in truth over tradition. That's the kind of storyline that today would be Oscar level, and then the fire, the test, the calmness in the face of destruction. That's more dramatic than half the Avengers movies. But what makes it even heavier is that it's not written like here's a cinematic moment, it's written like here's what real conviction looks like. That's deeper than myth. That's archetype. Or think about the story of Prophet Yusuf. Dude, that's a full season of a Netflix series right there. Jealous brothers, betrayal, slavery, survival, false accusations, prison, rising to power, forgiveness. It's got everything. And every single part of it hits you with some moral dimension that sticks with you long after the story is done. It's mythic, but it's also human. It's not gods fighting each other in the sky, it's human beings dealing with emotions we all feel. Envy, love, fear, hope. And that's the point. The depth isn't in the fantasy, it's in the realism. And then you got the seerah, the life story of the Prophet Muhammad. Man, whether someone's Muslim or not, you can't deny that this is one of the most chronologically documented, emotionally rich life stories in human history. It's got migration, war, peace, friendships, betrayal, strategy, compassion, every genre you can think of wrapped in one unified narrative. And the crazy thing is, it doesn't fracture. It stays coherent, purposeful, meaningful. That's rare. That's what he meant by depth. It's a story that grows larger the more you understand it. And he was basically saying that these stories, these Islamic narratives, are built like ancient epics but refined with purpose. They're not just big, they're meaningful. Each event isn't random, it's symbolic. Each character isn't just a character, they're a lesson. It's like the difference between fireworks and a sunrise. One is loud and flashy, the other is quiet but massive, cosmic, inevitable. And that's how these stories feel. Quiet power. You know what really hits me about this man? It's that when he talked about Islamic storytelling having that mythic depth, he wasn't talking about it like an outsider analyzing a culture. He was talking about it like a guy who spends his whole life understanding what makes a story immortal. And he understood that real mythology isn't about muscles, explosions, or some crazy supernatural twist. Real mythology is about the battle between who you are and who you're supposed to be. That's what gives a narrative weight. That's what keeps a story alive for thousands of years. And in the Islamic tradition, that inner battle is everything. Like, think about this. Every superhero we've ever loved is basically a metaphor for some internal struggle. Spider-Man is responsibility, Iron Man is ego versus redemption, Hulk is anger, Black Panther is heritage and leadership. But Islamic storytelling has been playing with these themes for over a millennium, except instead of giving them capes, they give you real humans wrestling with real consequences. They're grounded in the stuff that's actually hardest to conquer. Not a villain across the city, your own impulses, your own flaws, your own fears. And dude, the symbolism, that's where you start seeing the mythic scale he was talking about. The desert isn't just a desert, it's isolation, purification, clarity. Water isn't just water, it's mercy, rebirth, grounding. Light, darkness, mountains, storms, journeys, every natural element becomes a character of its own. It's like this giant canvas where the universe itself participates in the story. That's next-level writing. That's beyond what you get in ancient Greek myths where gods just show up and mess around for fun. This is nature interacting with human purpose. And then there's that whole oral storytelling tradition. People forget how important that was. Before anything was written down, it was heard. It was memorized. It was passed from voice to voice, heart to heart. You ever listen to someone recite a powerful story from memory, with rhythm and emotion? It hits different. It's like music mixed with narrative. And in Islamic culture, that was everywhere. People didn't just know stories, they carried them. They were living libraries. That's why the stories stayed intact. That's why they stayed alive. You can't kill a story when thousands of people have it memorized word for word. That's mythic. That's legendary. And the characters in these stories, they aren't flat archetypes. They're layered, complex, filled with contradictions and growth. A guy can be a warrior and a poet, a leader and a servant, strong and gentle at the same time. Women in these stories aren't just background ornaments, they're central figures with courage, intelligence, and influence. It's not this one-dimensional hero saves the day formula, it's a whole universe of human experience. And what he found fascinating, what a lot of people still don't get, is that these stories aren't meant to be escaped into. They're meant to pull you into yourself. Think about that. Most modern entertainment helps you forget your problems. These stories help you understand them. Most myths make you feel small next to gods. These stories make you feel responsible next to truth. They're not asking you to worship the hero, they're asking you to become a better version of yourself. That's why he said they rival ancient mythologies. Not because they look similar, but because they aim higher. Because they don't just explain the world, they explain the human soul. And they don't just entertain, they transform. That's the kind of storytelling that outlives empires, man. That's the kind that becomes part of a civilization's DNA. And here's the part that really blows my mind, man. When he said that Islamic storytelling rivals ancient heroic tales, he wasn't just talking about the stories themselves. He was talking about the impact, the cultural weight, the way these narratives didn't just sit in some museum like relics, they shaped societies. They built empires, fueled revolutions, inspired movements, comforted the broken, humbled the powerful. That's storytelling on a scale most people can't even wrap their heads around because look, when a myth survives, it usually survives in books or classrooms. But Islamic stories, they survive in people's actual lives. They survive in the way families talk to each other, the way parents raise their kids, the way communities make decisions, the way entire cultures think about right and wrong. These stories are alive in daily rituals, in prayer, in poetry, in architecture, in language and celebrations. That's storytelling that becomes culture. That's storytelling that becomes identity. That's so much bigger than entertainment. And he was fascinated by that. He loved structure, he loved world building, he loved character arcs that meant something. And here was this entire tradition where the world building wasn't fictional, it was a blueprint for living. The characters weren't exaggerated. They were human beings pushed to their limits. The arcs weren't temporary, they were eternal patterns. Fall, rise, repent, grow, mess up, fix it, become stronger. That's the stuff that humans connect to at a primal level. And one of the craziest things about Islamic storytelling is how it blends the intimate with the epic. A story can zoom into the emotions of one person, one tear, one prayer, one moment of doubt, and somehow it still feels cosmic. It still feels like the universe is watching. That's a kind of mythic energy that's hard to replicate. It gives ordinary moments this insane level of meaning. It makes people feel like their lives matter, like their choices ripple out into something bigger than themselves. That's what the greatest myths did. That's what the greatest storytellers try to capture. And this tradition has been doing it for centuries without even calling it mythology. And dude, the heroes in these stories, they're not invincible. They're not perfect. They're not these shiny stainless ideals. They struggle. They fall. They cry. They doubt themselves. They make mistakes and then they fix them. That's real heroism, man. That's the kind of heroism that actually inspires people. Because when you see someone who's unbeatable, you admire them but you don't relate to them. When you see someone wrestle with the same stuff you wrestle with and still rise, you think, maybe I can do that too. That's why these stories survived. That's why they still hit. That's why he was so impressed. Because mythology usually dies when the civilization that created it dies. But these stories didn't fade. They expanded. They spread across continents. They inspired scholars, explorers, artists, warriors, poets. They created eras, literal eras, of intellectual and spiritual development. And at the heart of all of it is this idea that storytelling isn't just a way to pass the time, it's a way to pass the truth. It's a way to pass the lessons people need to survive, to grow, to understand themselves. It's a delivery system for wisdom. And when you deliver wisdom through narrative, it sticks, it lasts, it becomes part of the way humans decode their own existence. So when he said Islam's storytelling tradition rivals the mythic depth of ancient heroic tales, he was actually saying it might surpass them, because ancient myths showed you what gods could do. Islamic storytelling shows you what humans can become. And that's the most powerful kind of mythology there is.